our listeners may not understand the concept of having three different brains. If you could amplify that a little bit.
Sure. We have three different brains that have three different anatomical structures that have their own concept of time, own concept of space, and their own chemical makeup. Now, the first brain is called your thinking brain, or your neocortex. That's the walnut-shaped, corrugated brain that you see typically that has all the folds and valleys. And we're speaking right now by using our neocortex. Now, every time you learn something new, you make a new connection in your thinking brain. That's what learning is. Learning is forging new connections in your brain. Remembering is being able to maintain and sustain those connections. So you read a book on success. You read a book on how to ride a bicycle. You read a book on how to dance salsa. You read a book on how to sew a quilt. You read a book on compassion or forgiveness. You read a book on patience and becoming a good parent. Now, all of that information is stored in your thinking neocortex, the seat of your conscious awareness. Now, the question is, what are you going to do with all that knowledge? Now, if you take that information that you understood philosophically or theoretically or intellectually, if you took all that knowledge and you applied it, or you personalized it, or you demonstrated it, would mean that you would have to modify your behavior in some way and do something differently. Now, when your behaviors match your intentions, or your actions are equal to your thoughts, the moment you align your mind and body, you're going to have a new experience. And when you have a new experience, you activate the second brain, called the chemical brain, or the limbic brain, or the emotional brain, or the midbrain. So now, you read the book on compassion and forgiveness, and you're walking around in your life, and you're thinking about it, and you're reviewing it in your mind, and you're contemplating it. And as you keep contemplating it, you're reinforcing the circuits that you've learned, and you're beginning to install a new mind. Now, the moment you begin to apply it now, let's say that all of a sudden you got invited to a company party, and at the company party you found out that your worst enemy is going to be there, the person that betrayed you and turned you in for something that you didn't do and misrepresented you. And you hear that this person's going to be at the party, and you're driving in your car, and you pull over on the side of the road, and you think about how you're going to choke this person and what you're going to say to them and how you're feeling, and all of a sudden you have all these reactions. And the moment you catch yourself, you become conscious of those unconscious states, and you begin to restrain those thoughts, those behaviors and emotions. Nerve cells that no longer fire together no longer wire together. You're literally cooling off mind and body that's connected to the old self, and you biologically begin to change by breaking apart those circuits in your brain and by no longer signaling the same genes emotionally. And as you begin to say, what did I learn in this book? And you say, oh gosh, it says to be present. It says to no longer hold the person to the past. And you go through this list of things that you learned, and as you begin to put yourself into the equation and you begin to mentally rehearse how you are going to be when you walk into this party, and you begin to think about the thoughts you do want to think, and you begin to plan the behaviors you are going to demonstrate, and you begin to think about how you do want to feel, you're making your brain fire in new sequences and new patterns and new combinations. And as you review who you do want to be, nerve cells that fire together wire together. You begin to install the neurological hardware in your brain ahead of the actual experience. You just installed a new mind. The hardware now is going to create software. So now you get into the party and you do exactly what the book says. You get your actions equal to your thoughts, your mind and body working together, and you have this new experience. And the moment you begin to feel compassion or feel forgiveness or feel love, and you do exactly what the book says to do, you're beginning to teach your body to understand what your mind has intellectually understood. You see, knowledge is for the mind and experience is for the body. And the moment you begin to feel compassion and feel forgiveness, you're beginning to chemically instruct your body to understand what your mind has intellectually understood, and you're beginning to embody knowledge. The word is becoming flesh. but it's not enough to do it once. You have to be able to do it over and over again. You have to repeat that experience so many times that you neurochemically condition your body to memorize forgiveness and compassion as well as your conscious mind. And if you do something repeatedly over and over and over again, you activate that third brain called the cerebellum, the seat of the subconscious. And when you get to that point where you have neurochemically memorized an internal order that no person, no thing, no experience can remove you from it, when you're in that state of being, that's when mind and body are one. And when you have that type of internal order, then we could say then you are now being greater than your environment. And this is how skills and habits and propensities are developed. And so we can go from thinking to doing to being, and when we get to that state of being, it's innate in us. We don't have to think about it any longer. It's who we are. And the quantum field responds to who we're being, not just what we're thinking or not what we're feeling, but the combination of our thoughts and feelings, who we're being.
That's so informative and so easy to understand when you put it in context like that.
You know, with the latest research now that's being done with functional brain scans and electroencephalographs, you know, we have such amazing information about when we're in a state, a meditative state, and when we're not. Now, when we're all sitting around listening to this show and our attention is on the outer world, our brainwave patterns, because of the neocortex functioning at such a high degree, is really pretty much processing what's called beta wave patterns. Now, in beta, because the outer world is more real than the inner world, the brain's function is to create meaning between what's going on in the outer world in comparison to what's going on in the inner world. It's trying to create coherence between the inner and outer worlds. And as we put all our attention on our external environment and we use our senses to do that, the neocortex perks up and it has to process if we're sitting down, if we're digesting food, if we're listening, if we're surfing on the computer while they're listening, if we're driving our car. Now, the moment we close our eyes and we begin to eliminate all the sensory information that's coming from the external environment, and sight is pretty much 80% of our stimulation, sensory-wise, and we begin to fill the room with music and no ambient sounds can be heard, the brain naturally is processing less information, and so the neocortex tends to slow down and it moves into a state of alpha. Now, in alpha, the inner world is more real than the outer world. In other words, our attention tends to go within. Now, without a doubt, when we are analyzing our life and we're thinking about how to resolve problems, as we do this, we're using beta wave thinking, and beta keeps us in our conscious mind. And in order for us to resolve the issues in our life, we have to switch into a state of alpha, because if we're thinking and analyzing our problems, we're actually moving further away from the operating system of the subconscious, because the conscious mind is separated by the subconscious mind by what's called the analytical mind. So if you pictured a circle, the very top of the circle was 5% of the circle, and then the very bottom of the circle was 95% of the circle, and there was a line dividing that 5% to the 95%. That line that separates the conscious mind from the subconscious mind is the analytical mind. And so people tend to analyze their problems, analyze themselves, and as they're analyzing, they're driving their brain further into their beta wave patterns or their thinking patterns. And so in the book, we talk about ways to slow down the thinking brain so that we can enter into the operating system where we can make those changes in the habits and behaviors that we've developed over the years. And only when we get beyond the analytical mind is when we can really make true changes.